Hello AP World History students, Mr. Lassiter here with you. And in this video we're going to take a look at time period 4 as we continue to review for our AP World History exam. We're looking here at global interactions from 1450 to 1750. Of course, the major thing that we're going to see in this time period is a truly global world developed as the Americas are brought in to trade with Afro-Eurasia. To help out with going through these key concepts, if you look in the description below, I've included a review packet which you can use to guide you through the concepts as you watch this video. If you need any additional information, take a look at AP Worldopedia or Freemanpedia. These are two of my very favorite AP World History sites. So let's go ahead and get started with our first key concept, globalizing networks of communication and exchange. Basically what we see here for the most part in this key concept is information about trade and how trade changed from 1450 to 1750. But before we talk about what changed, let's talk about what continued. In the concepts of this global circulation of goods, there are existing trade routes, regional trade networks that carry over from our last time period. And all of these will see an intensification of trade. So these trade routes include the Mediterranean Maritime Network, the Trans-Saharan trade, the Silk Road Network, and the Indian Ocean Maritime System. This intensification of trade will bring prosperity as well as economic disruption to merchants and governments in these regions. And that's going to be especially true because of European involvement. So let's start talking about those Europeans. In this time period, the Europeans will create technological developments which will allow them to really engage with maritime trade in a way that they had never really before been able to. Some of these technological developments included new tools such as the astrolabe, which you see pictured on the far left, or improvements to the compass, which you do not see pictured. These new tools and innovations were developed from previous knowledge from the classical time period, the Islamic world, and the Asian world. For example, Europeans were able to gain a better understanding of global wind and current patterns, which you see in the second picture here. And if we think about the Indian Ocean Network, they had long understood the monsoon winds and how that might help to make trade more efficient. And Europeans are able to apply this by mapping currents in the Atlantic Ocean, for example, to create faster voyages, more efficient voyages. Europeans are also able to create innovations in ship design. The development of caravels, carracks, and flutes will use innovations in shipbuilding that combine things from all over the world. For example, the lateen sail with the common Mediterranean rectangular sails, the stern rudder, other developments with these ships will enable Europeans to sail not just in their local waters, but across the Atlantic, into the Indian Ocean, and truly around the world. And lastly, we see the development of cartography and new ways of making maps, which allow transoceanic trade and travel to be possible. These new maps are much more accurate, and thus Europeans can better plan their routes. Now, after developing this new technology, Europeans engage in remarkable new transoceanic maritime reconnaissance. And this is really led by the Iberians, the Portuguese, and the Spanish. On the far left, you see a picture here of Henry the Navigator, who is credited with developing some of the first navigation schools in Portugal, which will also allow the Portuguese to increase travel and trade with West Africa. And trade with West Africa was really kind of the thing that sparks European interest in travel and trade. They wanted access to markets, especially of gold, in West Africa. And not wanting to trade through the Ottomans as middlemen, the Portuguese looked for another way to access those markets. As they continue to do so, they realize that perhaps the Indian Ocean is within reach, and they will continue to sail further and further south until they round the Cape of Good Hope. Now, the Spanish will sponsor the voyages of Christopher Columbus, who you see here in this second picture. And he will sail westward in search of India and China. And instead, he will find the Americas. These voyages and subsequent voyages across the Atlantic and later across the Pacific will dramatically increase European interest in transoceanic travel and trade. The French, the British, the Dutch will join the Iberians in these expeditions. And as I was talking about the Portuguese, eventually they do reach the Indian Ocean. You see here Bartholomew Diaz, who rounds the Cape of Good Hope, and Vasco da Gama, who reaches India. And we can see some of these voyages on this map. We also see some of the earliest empires which are developed, including New Spain in the Americas and the Portuguese trading post empire, which includes Brazil, regions of the coast of Africa, and regions around the Indian Ocean basin. Basically, Portugal did not create a land-based empire, but instead took over strategic ports throughout the Indian Ocean region and in the Atlantic, and created an empire that allowed them to be the middlemen often in trade and thus increase their wealth greatly. Now, this new system of trade, we say, is the first time the world truly became global. And we do see a global circulation of goods. And to make this as simple as possible, think of it in this way. Europeans wanted access to goods in Asia, particularly luxury items or spices, silk, porcelain, ivory from the east coast of Africa, etc. And in order to get this, they needed to bring something that Asian nations wanted. Well, there wasn't much that Europe was producing that countries like China or India was interested in. So Europeans had to find another commodity, something else to bring. And they found it in the Americas, as the Spanish discovered massive deposits of silver. And so silver will develop into our first true global currency. What you see there pictured in the top left is the peso de ocho, the pieces of 8 that the Spanish minted from the silver they found in the Americas. And this will be used pretty much all around the world for the next couple centuries as a currency that is widely accepted in the global trade market. Now, European countries will also develop economic structures to assist in this trade. Some will develop the policy of mercantilism, where they try to set up trade monopolies around their empire. They will approve joint stock companies such as the British East India Company or the Dutch East India Company to carry out trade. And then they will engage in this trade not only in the Indian Ocean network, but the brand new Atlantic system, where we'll see the exchange of cash crops, raw materials, finished goods, and we'll even see especially along the Middle Passage, the movement of slaves from Africa to the Americas to grow those cash crops. So a lot is going on in this time period as we see a new global circulation of goods. And keep in mind, as we see goods trade, we'll also see other things trade. We'll see food stuff, we'll see disease, we'll see animals traded, we'll also see ideas traded. So let's take a look at that Columbian Exchange, the big a major turning point in the world as we start to see a homogenization of the biospheres of the old world, Afro-Eurasia, and the new world of the Americas. And if you take a look at this, I'm sure this is a map that you have seen before in your courses. We see that the Columbian Exchange was a truly new connection between the Eastern and Western Hemisphere. What we see are diseases especially brought from Europe to the Americas. This is something that I'm sure that you have in the front of your mind. Diseases like smallpox, measles, and influenza are introduced to the Americas with devastating effects on the population of the Americas, killing well over 50% of Native Americans. Vermin are also brought to the Americas inadvertently. Mosquitoes, which carry malaria and other diseases, rats, which of course carry diseases, are brought to the Americas on these large ships that arrive and unintentionally change the ecosystem of the Americas. but also prominently, maybe not more prominently, but prominently, we also see an exchange of foods and animals. The the biggest effect here is American foods being introduced to Europe, Asia, and Africa, especially potatoes, maize, manioc, and the like. Potatoes, for example, will increase the calorie intake of the average European and the average African to create to give more calories. And to create healthier people who are going to live longer. We'll see population increases as a result. The Americas also produces cash crops, some of which are introduced from Afro-Eurasia to the Americas, such as sugar, and some which are native to the Americas, such as tobacco. And these goods are going to be grown in the Americas on large plantations, oftentimes by slave populations, and sold in Europe for massive profits. Now, the Old World also will introduce animals to the Americas. Horses, pigs, and cattle will change the landscape and change the way people farm in the Americas. And some foods are brought even by African slaves to the Americas, okra and rice. But as you can see on this map, there are many other things that I have not mentioned or don't have the time to mention that were traded in this Columbian Exchange. Again, the Columbian Exchange is more of a process of the movement of these goods from one to the other, a greater homogenization of kind of our biospheres, and less of what we might consider a trade network. Most of these are traded in the Atlantic system. The Atlantic system would be the trade network. Now, the effects of the movement of these goods, especially in Afro-Eurasia, can be seen in the increase in population. And this chart really shows it well. This showing beginning in 1500 that we see kind of a gradual increase in population, a slight uptick from what had been experienced prior. Now, there were, of course, more negative effects of the introduction of European goods and farming techniques to the Americas. European agricultural and settlement practices in America oftentimes were reflected in changes to the physical environment, whether it was deforestation or depletion or soil depletion. Those are two common environmental effects. So a little connection to theme 1 there of the course. Now we're going to shift gears a little bit here as we are seeing a globalizing network of communication and exchange. We're seeing the interaction of more people in the world as we see these trade networks intensify and people moving from place to place. And the increase in interactions that is taking place in this time period, 1450 to 1750, between newly connected hemispheres and intensified connections within Afro-Asia, we're going to see the reform of existing religions, the spread of existing religions, and also in this interaction, a creation of syncretic belief systems and practices. So here are some good examples of reforms of existing religions. On the far left, you see here a map representing the conflict between the Sunni Ottoman Empire and the Shia Safavid Empire. This rivalry is going to intensify a split between Sunni and Shia Muslims in the Middle East. In the middle here, you see a meme, I guess, of Martin Luther, nailing his 95 Theses to the church door. But in this time period, we're going to see a major turning point for Western Christianity, as there is a split in Western Christianity between the Roman Catholic Church and what will become the multiple Protestant churches, notably the Lutheran Church, the Calvinists, and the Anglican Church, or the Church of England. And the last thing we see here, with the intensification of trade and the spread of these trade networks, is a spread of Sufi practices around the Indian Ocean basin. Again, if you recall, Sufism is that branch of Islam which is not so much concerned with the law of Islam, but more so the spiritual side of it. Sufism will make Islam much more attractive and be able to blend better with the new cultures it comes in contact with, especially in the Indian Ocean basin. Now, we also see the creation of syncretic belief systems and practices in this time period. So we will see combinations of religions in interesting ways that blend different cultures. One example of this on the far left in South Asia, we see the development of Sikhism based on the teachings of Guru Nanak, which combined elements of Hinduism and Islam together in a new religion. In the middle here, we see from the Caribbean, Vodun, a combination of African beliefs and Christianity, which manifests itself in different ways, but we see kind of a blending of these cultures. And on the far right, Santeria, again, a combination of traditional beliefs that we're seeing in Cuba and Latin America, and then Christianity. Key concept 4.1 really wants you to look at several illustrative examples of these blending of religions and the reform of existing religions. And so there's about 6 of these listed total in the key concepts. I highly encourage you to take a look at all the examples that they offer and understand that this is a process that we see throughout this time period. And lastly, as we think about this globalizing network of communication and exchange, we have to keep in mind that a great deal of profit was generated from this growing economic framework. Profits increased and governments were able to collect many more taxes. And in periods of economic wealth, we often see that wealth is put toward funding for the visual and performing arts. We also see an expansion of literacy in this time period. And so what we see are innovations in visual and performing arts. So some examples include Renaissance art in Europe, miniature paintings in Persia, wood block printing in Japan, staying in Japan, the development of kabuki theater, which you see pictured there on the far right, even Shakespearean theater in Britain. And popular authors and literary forms and works of literature really come out of this time period, whether it's William Shakespeare's dramas, Romeo and Juliet, Hamlet, Macbeth, whether it's the work of Miguel Cervantes, the which you see pictured here, the first kind of Western novel, Don Quixote, whether it's the Epic of Sundiata from Mali or Journey to the West in China. We start to see some very popular literary forms develop in this time period as well. So a really good connection to culture. And why does it pop up here? Well, mostly because wealth is being generated in a way that hadn't been for quite some time. And with the expansion of these trade networks, we're going to see greater wealth being put to these visual and performing arts. All right, that's it for key concept 4.1. I know it gets a little wild at the end there. There's a lot of extra stuff going on, but keep in mind, really the meat and potatoes of this is this new global network of trade that develops. So keep an eye on that. Make sure you understand the Columbian Exchange and this global circulation of goods, and you'll do just fine for key concept 4.1. We'll see you in a little bit.